Thank you for joining us and welcome to the G25 Grant Admin Workshop. My name is Jessica Terry and I'm joined by my colleague Daniel Middaugh. Together we have almost 10 years of grant admin experience within this program, and we're excited to share some information with you that will hopefully set you up for success with your new and existing projects. Let's go ahead and look at the agenda today. Next slide, please. First, we're going to start with reviewing the G25 regulation updates that will affect the way that you manage your projects. We'll then review the reimbursement process from the finalized project agreement to receiving your reimbursements. We're also going to highlight grant administration tips and payment request best practices, which will include recommendations on organization and where to find the forms online. We'll then move into reviewing some common issues we see within payment requests, and we'll touch on what's due at the final payment request. Lastly, we'll end with our contact information so you can reach out to us for help in the future. And let's go ahead and jump right into those G25 regulation updates.
Hey, hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Middaugh. I'm one of the grant administrators here. We're going to talk about some of the regulation changes for G25. These are kind of a high-level summary, so we would encourage you to go to our website where you can find the full regulation text, including the changes as well as everything that's already in place. So the first change that we want to highlight is an updated definition for major repairs, which is now going to be considered anything that exceeds $750 and is not part of regularly scheduled maintenance. Another change is that beginning with G25, transportation costs cannot exceed the actual cost. So you're going to need to submit a receipt or an invoice or some sort of documentation so that we can verify the actual cost. One of the more significant changes is an expanded definition of equipment, which now includes heavy equipment and trailers. So that's been explicitly added to several sections, and we'll discuss it a few times during this presentation. For instance, a new ineligible cost is heavy equipment and trailer damage that's caused by the grantee. So you do want to be extra careful when you are backing up in a tight space. Our equipment disposition form also includes a section for heavy equipment and trailers now. Filling it out is otherwise the same, and you can submit that form to our ohv.grants@parks.ca.gov email address, and someone will take care of your request for you. A small change to our publications regulations. Like in the past, all published materials that have the OHMVR logo must be approved by the division prior to publication. New for G25 is all publications that are paid for by grant funds must be distributed for free. And that includes by third parties. So if you're giving maps to a local shop or a partner organization, they also have to distribute those maps for free, or any publication for free.
Thank you, Daniel. This slide covers all the changes to the reallocation request form. We've added guidelines clarifying that moving costs within the same project cost category will require an email to your grant admin. But if you're moving costs from one category to the next, that's going to require the reallocation request form prior to the costs being incurred. And we can't approve any forms past the end of your project performance period, or those costs are going to be denied. In other words, if there are changes within your staff line items, but you don't need to shift funds in from another category to cover those changes, all you need to do is send an email to your grant administrator, and then we can both save that email on file. Now, let's say you wanted to move funds from the contract category to the staff category. That's when you're going to have that requirement of filling out the reallocation request form, and you'll want to do so again proactively so that we don't have to deny those costs. If you need help filling out those forms, of course, we're here to help. You can set an appointment up with us and we can help you walk through the form. We also have a video online where you can watch not only tips on how to fill out a reallocation request, but also a little bit of help on budget tracking as well. Next slide, please. So let's talk through that common scenario that I just mentioned. In this example, the grantee had originally planned on initiating a contract for trail maintenance, but due to delays in getting their project agreement signed, they didn't have time to go through the formal contract process with their agency. They decided to shift funds from the original contract line item into the staff and equipment use categories so their internal team could move forward with that on the ground work and with a rented mini excavator. No deliverables were changing, so they didn't need to add much to the final section at the bottom of the form. And since the grantee is requesting to add a new line item, the grant admin needs to review this like they would any other project cost estimate line item while reviewing grant applications, which usually is with a team of up to 3 people. We may reach out to experts or our supervisor depending on the amount of funds you're moving or what that new line item is. Now in this example, based on what the information that was provided to us, the grant admin should ask for the level of the staff position. That would be like the GS levels at the forest, for example. We need the hourly rate, the amount of work planned compared to what was identified on the contract. And in addition, they should ask for more details on the mini X rental, such as how many days it will be used and how the grantee determined the rate they're asking for. For anyone who's submitted an application to us, this should all sound familiar, whether we give you a comment at prelim or you're just a pro and have all these details in there. Having all this type of information in your application and within this form will make it a lot easier and faster for us to approve it. Now let's move into the updates on the project accomplishment request form, also known as the PAR.
All right, so the PAR form has been updated too with some of these G25 changes. So if you're the type of person that saves documents on your desktop, please make sure that you download the appropriate version. If you send in an old PAR form, we are going to have to go back and ask for a corrected one. And anytime we have that back and forth with documentation, it could potentially delay your payment. So once you have your new updated form, a couple of things you'll notice have changed. For instance, the equipment purchases section now has a requirement to list any heavy equipment or trailers that you've purchased within your project. You also have to report how that equipment was used in the project. So make sure that you fill that out should you purchase any of those items. All right, at the bottom of the form, there's a new section that really only applies to BLMs or nonprofits, grantees who seek advances. For everyone else, you can ignore this section, but we did want to highlight it because it is a new part of the PAR form, and we don't want to cause any confusion for the folks that are watching our reimbursement session. So just keep an eye out for that.
All right, another requirement that was common practice but is now codified in the regs is the requirement of a sample of photos showing deliverables, which should be included with every PAR. For each photo, you'll want to include the GPS coordinates, and ideally, you'll provide not only before and after photos, but which deliverables were completed, which you can see in this example here. You have the GPS coordinates at the top, and below that, they're indicating which deliverable they accomplished within that photo. Also, whenever possible, we do prefer Word templates, which tend to retain a higher resolution, and that can make it a lot easier to see photo details. And this should be a lot easier now that we have our new SharePoint launching, which we will share with you soon. Next slide, please. And for the next update, for those of you who have ground disturbing projects, we want to make sure that you're aware that when selecting a teammate to perform required special status surveys and monitoring, it must be conducted by a qualified biological monitor or under the supervision of a qualified biological monitor. Next slide, please.
Don't worry, some of the regulation changes are going to make things a little easier. For instance, refunds to the department are now due within 90 calendar days from receiving notification, whereas in the past it was due within 60 days. But please keep in mind, this is only for G25 projects. If you're wrapping up a project from an earlier grant cycle, it still will have to be due within 60 days. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's shift gears. We're going to talk about the reimbursement process now. What you're looking at here is a high-level overview from the beginning of your project to receiving payment. So the first thing that you start out with is getting your project agreement signed, which includes your project performance period, the time period in which you can work on the project, and also getting your PO number created. That's a fancy number we used to help process payments. Once you get those cleared, you can actually start working on the project. Start spending money. That's the fun part. After a while, eventually, you're going to submit for reimbursement. So you'll submit your expenditure workbook, supporting documentation, your PAR, perhaps some photos, and we will then have one of the grant administrators, myself, Jess, somebody else, review those. Once we complete our review, our supervisor does a second look, reviews and makes sure that we didn't miss anything. Once that's clear, we enter your payment in our system. The state controller's office approves it, and your warrant, which is the check, gets issued. That typically takes about 4 weeks from when it's entered to when it's actually issued. But once you do receive that check, you are that happy guy in the corner there. Next slide, please.
Now let's go ahead and move on to the grant admin tips that we've composed for you. First, you'll want to get your project agreement finalized, like Daniel said, which typically includes finalizing adjustments requested within your factual findings, which you'll adjust within the project cost estimate in OLGA within your application. You'll also be selecting a start date for your project, which tends to be the same day, date every year for most of you. A lot of you end your projects December 31st, and you're starting back up January 1st. So still send in the email to compliance and select your start date so that they can get moving with that project agreement creation. And lastly, once you select your start date and you make your changes in OLGA, the compliance team is going to send you the project agreement once they're done working on it, and then you can have your authorized representative sign it. And once they do, you'll email it back to us. Our compliance team will have our manager sign it, and then they'll send you the final copy. Now, why do you need your project agreement? Well, first, it's your project scope and cost roadmap, which is definitely a good thing to share with your team, especially with the changes to the new reallocation request form requirements. But also, many agencies need the finalized project agreement to set up their job codes, initiate equipment purchases, and to set up contracts, for example. So please, lay out a proactive plan, which starts with getting those project agreements finalized. Next slide, please. Speaking of contracts, our program requires invoices. So when you establish those contracts, please build that requirement into the language, or at least have a conversation or an understanding with the contractor. We've seen a lot of delays with payment requests because we're waiting for the invoices, and we don't want that to happen for you. Specialized tip for the forest, get those project agreements signed so you can get your job code set up as soon as possible. It's always a good thing to try to beat the rush. All the other forests are doing the same thing. And for cities, counties, and districts, please submit your governing body resolution signed as soon as possible. We're not going to be able to release that project agreement to you until you have that turned into us, which is a regulatory requirement. Next slide, please.
Okay, We're going to talk about some payment request best practices now. One thing we're really excited about this year is the launch of our new SharePoint site. In the past, we know grantees have had problems with submitting large file sizes. Either they have to be broken up into multiple emails or sent through a cloud service like Google Docs or Box, something like that. But now with the launch of our new SharePoint site, you can submit files directly to there of any size, really. Maybe not any size, but size is bigger than email. You can still submit via email, but for larger file sizes, the new SharePoint is going to be a lot easier for folks. Let's talk about file formats in your submissions. We prefer PDFs for most supporting documentation like receipts, invoices, contracts, your DPR 364, something that needs to be signed, for example. For files containing photos, we do prefer Microsoft Word. The reason for this is Word doesn't compress the image size like it does when you convert to an Adobe file. So that allows us to see more detail in the photos. And it's actually not a new request. If you look back at our PAR forms, it does request that the photos are sent over via Word. And then for things like your PAR, your expenditure workbook, please keep those in Excel format, not converted to PDF. It just makes our review a little bit quicker. And of course, you want a quick review because that means you're getting your reimbursement faster. So using these file formats makes things easier for us. Hopefully it makes things easier for you too. But you want your money quicker, so, use those. Finally, good file organization helps a lot with our review also. So Jess is going to talk a little bit about that right now. Next slide.
Thanks, Daniel. Great tips. Yeah, I definitely like having the Excel so we can check in the items. So I'll ask for it if you don't send it in. One of the most impactful things you can do to help speed up our review is labeling documents well. It's also recommended that you keep your title short with no spaces, no special characters. This is a tip that we got from our RT team that they told us this will reduce your chance of a file getting corrupted, which you definitely don't want to have happen down the road if your project gets selected for an audit. So again, title short, no spaces, no special characters. The style that you see on the screen here, it's not required, but it's an example of what's working really well. We launched it a few years ago and have noticed a lot of our grantees are using it or something similar to it, which has been really helpful. And when you add your project agreement number and payment request number within the title, along with the name of the document, it definitely helps us know what you've submitted at a glance, which shortens our review time. We know exactly where that workbook is. It also helps us when we're comparing one payment request to the next, because we're often going to pull up a prior workbook and we don't want those titles to be the same, or we won't be able to launch both at the same time. In the examples we have listed here, at the top, you see example of the payment request form, which is the DPR 364. We also have a naming example for the workbook. And then you can see what we recommend for the supporting document titles in the middle. And the format you see there, it's inclusive of the rank of that category on the workbook, grant, and then match, the type of funds claimed, grant or match, within those documents, and the attachment numbers, whether it's one attachment number or a range. It's a fairly simple style, but it definitely makes a big impact on the organization of the submission, speeds up our review, and it can also help your team as well. Imagine in the future, let's say a year, 2 years from now, your project gets selected for an audit, and now someone on your team has to go in and try to find attachment number 2 or the workbook or any of the documents within that submission. When you have it organized like this, it's going to be really fast for them to find that information as well. So benefits on both sides. Now, at the bottom of the slide here, you'll see an example of what we recommend for the project accomplishment report title, just PAR1, that's for the first PAR submitted. the Soils Compliance Report, just SCR, make it short, and the Habitat Management Program, just HMP. Definitely having the project agreement and those documents helps our scientists when we forward them over to them. And then just having that acronym really helps us all understand what we're looking at before we open it. For anyone that's using this format already, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Anyone else that needs any advice on labeling, reach out. We can help, definitely. Next slide, please.
Let's talk receipts and invoices. You might notice a difference between the two receipts on your screen. You want to make sure that your receipts are legible. We need to be able to verify the date so we can see that it was purchased within the project performance period. We should know what you purchased. We should know how much it cost. If you have a bad scan, please don't handwrite anything. If you do, we are going to ask for a clean copy. And like I said before, anytime we have that type of back and forth, that just means that you're getting your payment that much slower. We do understand that some smaller companies sometimes use handwritten invoices, and that's okay. But for receipts from places like Home Depot, they do want to be clean copies. Some things that can help, maybe do your scans right away so that they don't have time to age. Of course, double check that the scan is high quality. Those types of things can help make sure that you have a better scan before you submit your supporting documentation. Obviously, the receipt on the right would be rejected, so please make sure that you do have a legible copy. And keep in mind, if you are a nonprofit, you have to have a zero balance on your receipts and invoices. So that could be a paid stamp with a date, a bank statement, credit card statement, something like that does have to be included with your submission. Obviously, with a receipt like this, we can see that it was charged to a MasterCard, and that would be sufficient. So next slide, please.
Also a good thing to tell your team, a lot of the folks that are out in the field doing those Home Depot trips, have them look at that receipt, once they receive it. And if it doesn't look legible right then and there, just have them reprint it. It's a lot easier than sending them back out there in the future. Now, this example is a gold standard, what we consider a gold standard of an invoice, where the grantee added an attachment number in the top right. They pointed out what line items this purchase falls under, in this case, materials and supplies number 6. And they added a breakdown of the totals they're claiming on the workbook in red at the bottom near the total. In addition, the date and total are highlighted, which is always appreciated. When we look at invoices and receipts, we're checking that the date falls within the project performance period, and we try to figure out what line item that item falls within. And when you add notes like this, it takes a lot of the guesswork out, which speeds up our reviews. We also look for a total that matches what's listed on the workbook, which is why the total breakdown in red really works. Some people think they can't claim both grant and match on the same invoice, and they'll even submit 2 versions of it. You don't have to do that. Just communicate with us on the invoice itself and put the information that will help us understand what you're claiming on that one invoice. We also notice in the middle of the page, there's a highlighted item in yellow. In this case, the grantee is trying to communicate with us that that is an indirect line item that they're claiming, and they added that individual total in the breakdown as well. So we knew what to look for on the workbook to cross-compare that. And then lastly, when you add attachment numbers to the actual document itself, you can scan them all together and in the order that the attachment numbers are. And that makes it a lot easier for the grant administrator to review it, because if we receive a submission where all of those invoices and receipts are separate, then it's going to take us a long time to double click and open it, double click and open it. Each time we have to close it, right? So if you scan them all together in the order that we're seeing them on the workbook, all we're doing is scrolling through it. We might highlight and add notes ourselves and check those off on the workbook. So definitely these are some of the gold standards that help us make your review faster. This is something that can help your team as well with the organization of the file. Next slide, please.
We've talked about a few different forms so far today, and we wanted to make sure that you knew where you could find those forms. If you go to any search engine and type in OHMVR, we're going to be the first thing that comes up. So it's a real quick, easy way to find our page. Once you go there, make sure that you click the grant section, which will give you a submenu also that includes the section grant forms where the arrow is pointing. On there, you can find the payment request, expenditure workbooks, forms for reallocation requests, the project accomplishment report form, and keep in mind that there are separate forms for each project type. So when you go there, you want to make sure that you get the appropriate form for your project type. You're also able to find these on our SharePoint site that we discussed earlier. So if you're already working in there, getting ready to submit documentation, you can just pull the files from there also. Also, I'd encourage you to bookmark this page just so you can navigate it to it earlier and skip that whole step with searching on Google. Next slide, please.
All right, now let's review common issues we see within the reimbursement workbook. Most commonly, we see the grant allocation row not filled in, which is key to the totals working together on your summary tab. Daniel's going to show you what that looks like on the next slide. We also see workbooks where the grantee forgot to list or update their match percentage. This usually happens when you're using the same workbook year over year. Make sure that you check it. I've seen submissions where they listed 26% match, but that year they only had 25% match required. So you do want to update that every year, every workbook. On the grant and match tabs, we see missing attachment numbers and or no description of what that item is in the notes section. You can imagine how that review might take a lot longer than if everything was labeled. And in all reality, we might have to send it back to you because we have other submissions we need to review that have all the info that we need. So do just take one glance before you submit it, see if you've listed all of those details for us. That kind of helps us like a guide to attach, what we're looking at in the workbook to all those different PDFs that you're sending to me. Next slide, please.
So what you're looking at here is the top half of the summary tab in the expenditure workbook. The fields that are highlighted orange are some things that are missed from time to time. You want to make sure that your grantee, you, the agency, and your project title match what's in your project agreement. Don't use abbreviations or shorthand there. You do want it to match. Please include your project performance period. More importantly, you want to include your payment request period, which is the period of time that you're submitting in the expenditure workbook. Make sure you have your project number and that you mark which payment request this is. A small but very helpful thing you can do also is fill out the grant allocation row, which is towards the bottom of this screenshot with the arrow there. If you aren't 100% sure what your grant allocations are, you can find those in your project agreement. Just go to the project cost estimate section, and each section, staff, contracts, etc., will have a total at the bottom there. Next slide. All right, so this is the bottom half of the summary tab, and these are a couple of really important sections. You have your minimum match requirement, which is the field highlighted in orange. This is not filled out automatically, so you do need to enter that. If you aren't sure what your required match percentage is, you can find that in your project agreement. Doing that allows the cells below to automatically populate, and that helps you keep track of your match spending throughout the project. To the right is the indirect tracker. That's a fixed 15%, so you don't need to enter anything there, but you do want to keep an eye on it. The last thing you want is to be wrapping up your project and find out that you're over on your indirect or you aren't meeting your match percentage, because that means we're going to have to tweak some of your numbers. You might not get reimbursed as much as you think you're going to be getting reimbursed, or you may even owe a refund to the department. So make sure you're keeping an eye on those. On the bright side, if you do have to submit a refund to the department, you will have 90 days to do that. Next slide, please.
Great tips again. That's one of my favorite parts of that workbook summary tab, is just kind of seeing where everybody's at in their projects, where you're trending on match and indirect. Definitely a good place to keep an eye on it. A lot of our grantees will actually use the workbook as a budget tracker because of that section. And what you're seeing on this slide is where you would input all of your purchases, right? So I've zoomed out so that you can see what the entire grant and match tab looks like. And at the top, you'll find a category for a column for each category on your project agreement, and a place to add your attachment number and a note for each line item, which we'll see on the next slide. You have one tab for your grant expenditures and one tab for your match expenditures, and all of those totals are what are loading up to that summary tab to show you where you're at with all of your spending. So really good the way that these workbooks are created. Could definitely work as a budget tracker for yourself. Let's go ahead and zoom in and see what that looks like. All right, so on this slide, we've zoomed in. We've got the materials and supplies column, and what you see here is a gold standard example where the grantee listed the totals, they put the attachment numbers, and in the notes section, they listed the project cost estimate line item number and a description of what the items are, like PPE, lumber for fencing, and vault toilet cleaning supplies, which are all materials and supplies line items 2, 6, and 8 in this example. So talk about a roadmap to what we're looking at. That is a perfect way to communicate with your grant admin. We see all these different submissions, and having some type of communication like this to point us exactly to what you're claiming in the project agreement is everything. It's probably the number one thing that would speed up a review for us. Oftentimes we see things like Home Depot or Amazon listed in the notes section, which doesn't help point us to what line item that is. We can already see that's a Home Depot receipt. We don't really need that in the notes section. We're really looking for what that line item is used for and where it falls in your project cost estimate. So using one of this format is one of the most impactful ways that you can help us, along with labeling your documents, and it should help your team as well. Because if you can't figure out what item, this line item, the item that you're submitting, your invoice or receipt, if you can't figure out where on the project cost estimate that item falls within, it's likely that you need to set up a reallocation request and send it to us for approval. Because if we receive items in your submission that are not on your project cost estimate and we have not received your reallocation request form, then we have to deny it based on the G25 Regulation Updates. So again, great place to do your budget management tracking, get ahead of reallocations this way. We know there are teammates that are the folks that are doing the purchases out in the field sometimes, and then sometimes someone back at the office. This is a great way for you all to stay on track with your spending as well. Next slide, please. Now, this is the top of the payment request form, which gets submitted to the State Controller's Office, also known as SCO. SCO will kick back the submission if any of the funding information isn't a match to the contract they have on file, which definitely delays the payment, because then you're going all the way back to the front of the line to get approved for those payment requests. And they are approving hundreds, if not thousands, of payment requests in those departments. For each new project, you'll want to make sure to update the fiscal coding at the top, because it does change project to project. All of the coding that I'm talking about is highlighted in orange, and it has the arrows pointing to it. And you can actually find all of this information within your project agreement on the first page at the bottom. So just if it's a new project and you've used this workbook before, don't forget to change this part. Especially if there's a signature on it, it can make it challenging for us to update it for you, and we might have to kick it back to you for corrections. We also see where the boxes aren't checked on this form. So do note there's a box for your final payment request, which is in the middle of the screenshot. You're going to check this if it's your final payment request. Below that, in section number 4, you can see there's a box for reimbursement there that you're going to check at the bottom. So do make sure to check that if you're submitting a reimbursement. And for the force, you'll want to list your bill for collection numbers within this section. You'll see it in section number 2. I've underlined bill for collections, and typically that's to the right is where the forests are listing their BFC numbers. If you submit multiple bill for collections within one workbook, that's totally fine. Just make sure that you're listing all the different BFC numbers. This is how Albuquerque ties your payment to your actual agreement, is that number. Next slide, please.
So this is the bottom of the DPR 364 form. And these are 2 items that get missed more often than you might think. The address, please make sure that it matches what we have on your original registration. If you put a different address, if your address has changed, please let us know as soon as possible because we'll have some paperwork you need to fill out. If you put a different address in there, it's going to be kicked back by the state controller's office, and that will further delay your payment. Also, please make sure to sign the DPR 364. You can do it with ink signature and scan it, use Adobe, use DocuSign, whatever is easiest for you. Just make sure that you don't miss it, because if we have to come back and ask for a signature, then your boss is out. Saying it again and again, delaying payment, making sure you get things right will make sure that you get your payment faster. Next slide, please.
We also wanted to take a moment to highlight the requirements for volunteer reporting, because we often receive various volunteer sign-in sheets or Excel summaries which are missing at least one of these required data points. So regardless of you use your internal forms or you compose a summary in Excel, which we definitely prefer, what we need on your supporting documentation are the following. We need the volunteer's name, the dates and hours worked, the activities they performed related to the deliverables on your project agreement, the rate you're claiming, which should match your approved rate on the project agreement. Even if it's gone up that year, you still want to refer to the rate that was locked in on your project agreement. And you should add a formula that shows how you determine the total you're claiming on the workbook. You can use your internal forms but if any of the details are missing, we're then going to have to kick it back to you. If you want to proactively add that information in and send us the copy to see if anything's missing, we can. If it was me, I would take this slide and print it out and have it on my desk when I was working on the volunteer sign-in sheets and just kind of use it as a check-off list, making sure that it was all included. And if you do turn in your sign-in sheets as your supporting documentation, which isn't required. Again, we prefer the summary because it's a lot easier to see, a number in Excel versus your volunteer trying to write a number for the hours they worked, right? You do need to make sure if you turn in the sign-in sheets, though, that all of the volunteers have signed them and that you've had a supervisor or lead sign off on each of those sheets. That is an audit requirement. So if you choose to go that route, do make sure that the document is going to make it through an audit. There's no sense in submitting something and years from now, if one of us misses a detail, you don't want to be surprised with the refund, right? So have this slide up, make sure the details in there. Work with us if you want to talk through forms that you're using. We can help you find ways to add the missing information into it. And again, whenever possible, the Excel summary is always going to be our favorite, because then we can actually check the totals and the formulas and everything like that, which is the fastest way to review volunteer reporting time. Next slide, please. Now we're going to move on to common issues we see within the Project Accomplishment Report, also known as the PAR. The most common issue we've been seeing with the PARs are a mismatch of the grant and match hours in relation to the labor report and volunteer summaries. So please double check your totals and make sure they align with your supporting documents. Your grant and match hours should be listed on your PAR. And think of it like this. The PAR is really a holistic snapshot of your entire submission. It's one of the first places a grant administrator is going to look. We're going to look to see what work was completed. It's definitely a pleasure to look through the photos that you submit And then we start to go into looking at that supporting documentation to see, you know, where that work aligns with what you're claiming. We're also seeing submissions where the routes and the areas are lumped into one line item. And if the public reaches out to us, and let's say you're a forest and you've listed your entire forest as the area you're reporting on it, and let's say that member of the public said, hey, you know, they're not doing work in this OHV staging area, excuse me, for example, right? Then we're not going to be able to really see where that work is. So we are kicking those back. We're having you add additional information and break out your different OHV areas. You don't necessarily have to go into the exact trails, but do keep that type of information on file. We should just be able to holistically look at that PAR and see what was the work you completed and where was it located. We want to make sure that that's aligning with what you said you were going to do on your application, right? And for our review process, if everything's lumped together, it makes it really hard for us to verify that you're doing the work which aligns with your project area and what's on your project agreement. We also need you to list either acres or miles, which will depend on the type of work you're doing. And you'll see what this looks like on the next slide. You won't need to list both. The deliverables that are listed there are really going to dictate whether you are listing miles or acres, right? You do also want to make sure that every statement that you put as to what you've accomplished within that work, there needs to be an OHV nexus, right? So it needs to be clear that what you're doing out there has a relation to OHV. I've seen project accomplishment reports where a law enforcement team had listed that they were out patrolling for illegal Christmas tree cuttings, right? And so, of course, I kicked it back and I said, hey, that's not really the intent of our program or an OHV program. Help me understand. And they said, hey, we were actually out there doing OHV patrol. We were on a green sticker route, and we happened to come across folks that were doing illegal Christmas tree cuttings. That's totally fine. They just had missed that whole first part where it was showing me how it was related to OHV. So that's something that we always have to keep an eye out for. So, put a good amount of detail in there to help us understand. You're also going to list your indirect items that were purchased within your section, which is often missed. And Daniel will talk about what we're looking at for that. And there's a section at the very bottom of your PAR where you're going to list your unspent funds and the reasoning you didn't expend all your funds, which we need to know just in case the public reaches out, but also for our program as well. Now let's go ahead and see what this all looks like in the PAR. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jess. That was a lot of information. So let's look at where it goes in the PAR form. This is the top half of the PAR form. Section number 1 is where you're going to be listing a lot of your activities. In this example, you can see that we have 2 areas that are separated out. For acres and miles, it's typically going to be one or the other. Miles, that's going to be something like trail work, whereas acres, that could be a restoration area or maybe constructing a new staging area. Please make sure that your hours worked align with what's in your expenditure workbook. And like just said, for your work completed, you want to make it clear what was done and what the OHV nexus is. Next slide, please.
And really, the simple thing on that OHV nexus on that last slide is that it's OHV areas they're working in, just pretty simple there.
So section number 2, this is where you're going to put activities that aren't listed above. So that might be something like distributing maps, or maybe a booth at an expo that you were hosting. Sections 3 and 4, those are really just indicators for us to see how you're trending with your project. So please make sure that you do tick those boxes. Number 5 are indirect costs, and we do want you to be as detailed as possible here. Sometimes indirect costs can be a little vague, so the more information you can provide, the better it is for us, just so we know where those indirect dollars are going. Equipment purchases, we discussed this already. It does include heavy equipment and trailers now, so if you do purchase equipment, please make sure that you tick that box and provide information on how it was used in the project. Number 7, for photos, if you include them, please make sure you tick the box and include a Word file. And actually, you can see right there, like I mentioned earlier, where we do request that they do come in a Word document. And finally, if it is the final payment request and all the funds weren't spent, just provide a detailed narrative of why that happened. We totally understand things happen. You could have staff turnover, natural disasters, things happened. You're not going to get in trouble for it, but we do want to know what happened, what impacted the project, so that you weren't able to spend all of those funds. Next slide, please.
All right, we have just 3 more slides to go, and we're done with the presentation today. And when you're done with your project, this is what's due with your final payment request, which must be received within the division within 120 days of the end of your project performance date. And this is then be how you keep yourself in good standing. So it's really important. On your workbook, on the summary tab at the bottom, it's your final payment request. You want to verify that you've reached or exceeded your match percentage. You'll also want to ensure you have not exceeded the max indirect of 15%. If you see red at the bottom of your summary tab, that's not a good thing. You're probably needing to make some corrections to what you've submitted. All your project deliverables should be complete, and if they aren't, you should leave the funds in relation to what you didn't complete unexpended, and you'll tell us information about that on the PAR to help us understand why you're leaving the funds. And if you have documents listed on your project agreement within your deliverables, like reports or monitoring, please do send those in. We often will send that to our environmental science team. And for your soils compliance report and your HMP, really good tip here. You do not need to wait until you submit your payment request to submit those documents. A lot of you are going to end your projects at the end of December. Obviously, the work stopped at that point, so no need to do any additional monitoring. If your scientists have finished your HMP or your soils reports ahead of time, submit those in. We can actually get those off to review to our environmental science team, and they could take up to 30 days to approve them. So if you beat the rush, you get it to them, those are approved. When it comes time and you're now submitting that payment request, all we have to do is review that payment request in your PAR, all your supporting documentation, and once we're done with our review, we can now move it on for payment, approval with our supervisor, for example. If you submit it all together, that's fine as well, but it might hold us back if the soils or HMP takes longer to get approved than us. So just a tip, beat the rest. You can get your documents in and we can get those reviewed for you. Next slide, please.
Right, so this is our contact page. If you have any questions after watching this presentation, this is where you can find who to contact. We have our management team, us, the grant administrators. If you aren't sure who your grant administrator is, at the bottom of this page where that arrow is pointing, you'll see the grant administrator agency assignment list. It is up to date. So just click that. It'll open up a PDF and tell you who your grant administrator is, so you know exactly who to contact. You can also find contact information for our compliance unit, who you do work with from time to time, and our environmental review team. So if you have questions on your HMP or your soils report, you'll know who to reach out to there. Next slide, please.
Right, and we wanted to end with our contact information. If you're not sure who your grant administrator is, use that link that Daniel just showed on the Contact Us page. You just click that Grant Admin Agency Assignment list, and we do update and post that, whenever we have new teammates. And if you haven't received an invite, all this talk of invoices, if you haven't received an invite to the SharePoint site, please do email our team at the ohv.grants@parks.ca.gov email address, and we'll get you added to that. You might notice there's a couple new names on the slide here. Heidi is one of our new grant admins. She's been helping us advance the slides today. And we also have Lauren Porter, who's starting a couple weeks after we recorded this. So we're excited to have some new teammates. You also see folks like Lisa Fernandez, who've been around a long time. She's with us as a retired annuitant, helping with our law enforcement projects. And then you have Daniel and I listed there as well. Seasoned pros, I'd call us, Daniel. We definitely wanted to thank you for making time to listen to our advice. If you have any questions about anything, please reach out. All of us are more than happy to answer any questions that you have. We hope you have a fabulous day. Thank you.